Hi guys, the moment that we have all been waiting for has arrived. Welcome to the CEO Forum special edition, Talks on the Rocks. Now Faye must be wondering what is this Talks on the Rocks? What happened is Faye that after coffee with Karan, I said we also must have something very interesting. So I said, what is it that CEOs enjoy the most? After 7 p.m., especially on a weekend, it's a glass with their favorite drink, some soda or some ice rocks thrown in. So I decided we're going to call it Talks on the Rocks. And believe me, I'm sure it sounds a lot better than Coffee with Karan, and it tastes a lot better than that. And I'm sure the mood also is a lot better. So that explains Talks on the Rocks. Now, um, Faye, without much ado, let me start in the normal television like procedure. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let us said a little too fast. But here we have Faye for you. Guys, maybe you can give her a welcoming hand from wherever you are. Silent as it may sound, but I'm sure Faye can hear it.
Thank you.
Oh yeah.
Welcome, Faye.
Loud.
Thank
Welcome,
you.
Faye. Faye, yes, I can see you now. Faye, I've been watching you on television since a long time, and I've often observed how calm you are. Calm and sometimes as fiery as you can be. So I've always been intrigued by your personality and often wondered how you must have been as a child, how you must have been as a student in school, how you must have been as an employee in your initial days, and most importantly, how you would have been as a wife at home. So I'm going to ask you just in about 3 minutes, take us through 13 years of your initial experience as a child, school, student, employee, and wife in just about 3 minutes. Just tell us about yourself. We would all like to get to know you a little better, Faye.
Okay, so thank you for this invitation. Thank you for including me in the CEO Forum. It's an honor to have conversations with such amazing people. I was just looking at the chat that began before this chat began, and it's really impressive, the group that has gotten together under the CEO Forum umbrella. So it's a pleasure to be part of this group. To not waste any time and quickly get to the answer that you asked me, so I'm Kannadiga. A lot of people can't figure that out from my name. I was born in Chikmagalur, which is coffee growing country in Karnataka. My parents lived on a farm when I was born. So the first 6 or 7 years was just spent around animals. Then we moved to Bangalore, where I went to school and to college. I went to Mount Carmel College in Bangalore, where I studied journalism. I was a very quiet child. I had books in my bag wherever I went. So, for example, if we had to go to some uncle's house or some auntie's house for dinner, I would carry a book with me, and I would find the quietest corner to sit under the staircase or behind a door so that I could just read until dinner was called. A lot of times people didn't even notice me because I was really quiet. I was one of those children. I had like huge glasses when I was in the first standard itself. So. For those of you who are from the south, you will identify with the fact that I was called Kannadi for the longest time when I was growing up in Bangalore. I went to Mount Carmel College, which is where I sort of discovered my voice. It was a college that really gave opportunities to young people. I met a lot of great professors who taught me public speaking, who taught me theatre, who taught me to speak. It's also a college where, and I believe this is what colleges are for, that sort of teaches you what to believe in and teaches you to stick to your guns. So largely a lot of the work was done in those college years to make me who I am, and obviously by my parents who insisted on honesty and hard work in everything. When I finished my master's, and I was working with All India Radio through my master's, where I would read the news and play late night shows in English and in Kannada. And I moved to Mumbai to work with CNBC TV 18 in 2004. That's when I started my career. And I worked as a producer and then as a reporter on a subject called insurance. It was a beat that no other journalist wanted, which is why I got it. And again, I was very quiet at that time. but I really loved the the detail that goes into reporting on a complicated subject. I loved reading documents. I loved understanding complicated legal jargon. I spent a lot of time in consumer court, and again, those who are familiar with the legal system and would know that consumer court is a very unglamorous, very difficult place to actually figure out. And that's where I figured out that really citizen issues is something I feel very strongly about. So I worked with business channels, CNBC and ET now, for almost 15 years. And I worked in Mumbai, in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, in Delhi, back to Mumbai again. And a couple of years ago, then we decided to launch a separate channel within the Times Group, which I was fortunate enough to ask to be headed. And as the editor, then I decided that, okay, let's do something that focuses on citizen issues. And I suppose that brings you up to speed with my life. So yeah, I was extremely quiet until I was not quiet anymore. And as far as how I am as a wife, I suppose I'd be the wrong person to give you that review. You should be asking the person who is on the receiving end of that personality. But I was very fortunate to meet someone who is a great partnership. We're a very strong unit together. He believes in my career very strongly, and we support each other a great deal. In fact, just last week we completed 10 years together. So 10 years have really quickly gone by, but I think that strong partnerships really make great lives. So I'm a strong believer in, in building those strong partnerships. That's not it. It's unfortunately just not a very exciting story.
No, it was interesting. I like the way you presented your childhood little girl who would sit in a corner with big glasses, and then how you ran over your entire career in about just 3-4 minutes. It's interesting. How did you meet your husband?
We met at work, actually. We were colleagues through my entire stint at CNBC and at ET now. So we were colleagues.
Okay, so he proposed. He proposed, yes. Obviously. Yes. Okay, I can imagine. Okay, in fact, now you have also answered my next question of how you got into television, which has been interesting. Ever since you left Mirror Now, those 3-4 other girls have been trying to emulate you. They're trying to copy you. They've been trying to come up to your level. But believe me, they are not a patch on you. They're not a patch on you. You know, they've just not been able to come up to that particular level, and the kind of sincerity that you have been able to deliver through your language, your style, your expressions. So let's leave that as that.
Well, that's actually very sad to hear, because I trained those girls. I would expect them to be more convincing.
Now you train them fine, but still they cannot come up to the master. Okay, what are your plans now? I mean, what do you have in mind? I got to hear that you intend starting your own channel or something?
Yes, so not on television. I believe very strongly that the format or the business model for television news is irreparably broken at this point. I'm using the internet, which I have been doing for the last 1 year. I use Instagram and YouTube very heavily to give news to young people. I believe that, again, there is a challenge in the fact that there's nobody talking to young people in this country right now. All of the news is very adversarial, it's very shouty, it's very opinionated. Whereas for someone in their 20s or someone who is 17, 18, 19, they need to just be told very simply what's going on and what that relevance is. And then one needs to also give viewers/readers the respect to be able to make up their own minds. There's too much pigeonholing and labeling of a news consumer, saying that you're either this side or that side, you should believe this or you should believe that, or this should make you angry or that should make you angry. I think that that's a very wrong way to go. The job of a journalist is to just give information and let the audience decide if they want to be happy or angry or good or bad or sad about it or however they want to do. So actually, when I left television, and it was a very sudden sort of exit, so I was put on something called gardening leave, which is basically you're supposed to sit at home and not work for anybody else at that time, and also not work with the organization that you're with. So I was just sitting at home, I was watching the news, and it was really frustrating me that the real issues were just not being picked up. So I started on my Instagram page writing what I called news that should be headlines. So every day I would put out 4 or 5 stories of news that should be headlines, and it would just be without opinion. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And when I left television, I was at 35,000 followers on Instagram. I'm close to now 7 lakh followers on Instagram, because
Wow.
it was just, and young people just found it really easy to consume because it's a short read. It's not, nobody's shouting at you while they're telling you this. It's easy to share. It's easy to understand. It also gives them that curiosity of, oh, I want to know more about this. So then they can go read up about it. But someone has just told them what has gone on in the country and the world over the last 24 hours. And they find that, I think, heartening. So from there came the idea to launch an entire news platform that is based only on information. So I've decided to dedicate the second phase of my career to information. So news that doesn't have opinion, doesn't have outrage, and doesn't have any activism. So there's going to be none of that. No, we should actually get this done. It's going to be very simply, this is what has happened. This is what the experts say is the impact of what has happened. Now you decide if it is good or bad. You decide how you want to feel about it. It's not up to me to trigger your emotions, or it's not up to me to trigger either fear or anger in you, which is what news has become, unfortunately. And this is a brand that will be present across platforms. So right now it will be Instagram and YouTube and all of the places where young people are accessing their information and their content. But if at some point they decide Instagram is not cool anymore and they want to be on a different platform, then this news platform will move with them. And it will be a membership-driven sort of group of people who care about the environment, care about building a progressive society, care about the economy, care about women empowerment, care about safety, care about education, mental health, wellness, these sort of main themes that young people care about today. Because I'm sure everyone in this group will agree with me when I say that our 20-year-olds today feel more strongly, or they have more in common with their counterparts in New York and London than they do with what is being said on television today. They want to be part of a progressive society that's based on equality and science and technology, that's supporting the environment, that's supporting young people. And they see a very different India. And I believe that we should be pushing more and more of that idea forward, of progressive ideas, of R&D, of science, of healthcare, of education, of how we're going to be the next world. And now this is a slightly controversial thing to say, but I'm a lot younger than a lot of the other journalists out there. So in terms of being able to connect with young people, most of the others who are speaking right now are in their 50s or their 60s. So it makes it much easier for me to connect to young people based on what they based on what they're feeling right now, based on what they care about, to be able to curate and fact check news for them. So that's the launch plan. That's what we're doing. We're a couple of weeks away from doing a soft launch, and then after that, we'll put together a larger team and do a formal launch as well.
You have many fans in the CEO forum, and I'm sure that many of us could support you in whatever resources that you would like to have in starting your channel. I don't know, what do you want to call? Do you call it a news channel, or do you just call it an internet channel? How do you call it?
We call it a news brand.
A news brand.
It's a brand of news. Yes, it's a type of news. It's a brand of news.
And I like the way that you said no opinion, no outrage, everything that's opposite of my friend Arnab. Okay. Okay. So I have been observing, rather since the past 2 months, there is a channel war happening. Have you noticed there's actually channels at war?
Yes.
Times of India, Times Now and Republic are singing one particular tune, while we have India TV and NDTV singing a different format. What format would you subscribe to? I mean, as of today, would you kind of, just to get an idea of your thought process, utilizing the current happenings these days, what is your personal feel about Kangana and Riya, and what is quickly happening in about 2 minutes, if you would like to share?
The short answer is it's a massive distraction from what is really going on in the country. And unfortunately, a lot of us are falling for that distraction. The long answer is that, and quite honestly, the first document at all there was to examine in the case against Riya Chakrabarti was when the NCB submitted a remand copy to court on the bail hearing, and we've had lawyers look at it. I had a very technical show when we legally looked at that document, and the case is unfortunately not very strong. I mean, we're talking about 50 grams of weed which has not been seized. The physical evidence doesn't exist. For the NCB, which is a national, investigating agency, to be going after 50 grams of weed, which fills the chillum of, half the people in, say, Himachal and, the places like that, it seems like a stretch of resources, because the NCB, the Narcotics Bureau, normally goes after drug cartels who are in, moving drugs across borders. So it does seem like this is being made into more than it really is. Now, again, it's not up to me to guess as to why this is happening. As a journalist, I can only look at the document that is available, and we can have experts look at it and tell you what the law is, and tell you that this law is being stretched a little bit in this particular case. Also, between Kangana and the Maharashtra government and the Bihar police and the Mumbai police and the CBI and the ED and the NCB, it just seems like there are a lot of political puppets in this dance. And at this point, what has happened is, I've actually stayed on 3 stories for the last 3 weeks, actually more than that. These are very serious things that are happening in our country that we've gotten completely distracted from. So these political puppets have actually successfully done their job, because we currently, in the next 4 weeks, will be the worst affected country for COVID in the world. In the next 4 weeks, we have over 1,200 people who are dying of COVID every day in this country. And the sad part about it is that because the media is not paying as much attention to it, people seem to think that everything is okay. Everybody's walking around without their masks, whereas a lot of people are still dying and we're not taking precautions. Our economy is arguably at the worst point it has been since independence. And steps need to be taken to quickly recover from this, but there isn't enough conversation happening on that matter. Our unemployment status is again perhaps in the worst situation it has ever been. I had a conversation with some experts who are tracking unemployment who simply say that college students graduating this year will just not get jobs. They will not get jobs. So imagine the 5 million kids who will graduate this year, if their exams are held, or if their exams are not held, who will not get jobs, which means only those children whose parents can afford to look after them will be okay. But those who have taken home education loans, those who need to get a job, those who need to start earning are going to be in trouble. They're competing with people with 10, 15 years experience who have also lost their jobs at this point. So I could go on for a while because I feel very strongly about the economy. The third point, yes.
Please go on.
So I just believe that as people who run businesses, as people who work in businesses, as people who are just looking around us, we know that this is a bad situation. And I would like for more of us to be having conversations about this rather than having conversations about Kangana and Riya, because let's be honest, that's a case. That something is happening, there is a case there, yes, but it's not the most important thing in this country. We need to encourage more voices about economy. We need to find solutions for our problems. If the economy collapses, we're going to be in trouble for many, many years. And we can't afford it. Let's be honest, we can't afford it. I mean, we've got China climbing across, into our border in the north. My sources who are currently positioned in Ladakh tell me that it's -5 degrees already. We have 40,000 troops there. These are terrible conditions. And China is constantly eyeball to eyeball. If this extends into winter, it's going to be, at the very least, a very expensive prospect for India. I mean, we have a strong army, but it's expensive to keep troops on that border and to keep them at a certain level of readiness constantly. I mean, these are big problems that we have brewing, and we're not talking about it. I mean, I'm sure Kangana is important. She's just not important to me.
No, total loss of priorities,
Yes.
and total intelligence failure, the way I see it as of now. Okay, I think you've covered a lot of questions. I want to leave a lot of questions for our viewers, so I'm going to ask you. But before I come to that, just one question from me to sum it up all. I have always believed since a very long time that India and especially Maharashtra, because this is where I can feel the pulse, we are a police state disguised as a democracy. What do you feel? And it's being evidently proven right now. What do you
Yes.
feel? I repeat, we are a police state disguised as a democracy. What do you feel?
Well, so first of all, I must confess that I am a bit of an idealist when it comes to our democracy. I believe that our democracy is strong. It has survived the emergency. It has survived bomb blasts. It has survived much upheaval, and it still stands. But I will agree to a part of your statement that policing is a very, very serious problem. Political interference in policing, it starts from appointments to transfers to political favors, and we can see that political interference play out very clearly right now. In the last, I think, 7 or 8 years, something very serious has happened. One, political interference seems to have increased, and we've seen this play out across the country in various states, not just Maharashtra, whether it is West Bengal or whether it is Tamil Nadu or whether it is Karnataka, and in the state of Maharashtra, Delhi specifically, where the police starts to behave like an extension of the government or the political party that happens to be in government, where it is behaving like the henchman or the hitman of the government. And so we found ourselves in the last 7 or 8 years at loggerheads between state police and central agencies very, very often. Also now add to this mix social media, where there is a great deal of pressure that gets put on police to show results, to something that people care about. So quickly make arrests, quickly do something. And obviously the police is reacting to this as well because politicians are reacting to it and saying, kuch karo. As a result, we have some very scary things that have played out in our country. For me, one of the scary things were in Hyderabad when those 4 rape accused people were taken out and shot in what was a very thinly veiled encounter, after which the police were celebrated and fed laddus. These were policemen who failed to save that girl because they didn't take the complaint when her parents complained. They didn't go out and look for her, and they lost precious hours in which she died. And then they solved the problem by just shooting someone. And they completely bypassed the entire justice system, and they got away with it. And then again in Uttar Pradesh, we saw the whole Vikas Dubey case was shocking, story that played out, and they got away with that as well. It seems. Again, we see what's happening in Maharashtra. This whole Kangana Ranaut beating up of ordinary people over a tweet or a WhatsApp message. This is ridiculous. I mean, ideally, there should be no political interference in our policing system. Ideally, politicians should have no say in who becomes commissioner and who gets promoted and who gets transferred, who gets punished, and who gets who gets moved out, or who's made to sit without any posting at all. But unfortunately, that's the system that we're living in, and I believe that there is a part here for all of us to take responsibility for. We don't pay close enough attention to policing. So when there is a transfer, or when there is a commissioner who's appointed in our city, we don't quickly Google and say, what is this chap's history? Has he been accused of corruption? Is he a good guy? Why is he my commissioner? We don't show any interest in policing until something very bad happens, and then we all have a conversation about it. So if we showed 1/10 of the interest in policing that we are currently showing to Kangana Ranaut, we would have a better policing system. Right now, the police are not accountable to us. They're only accountable to their political masters, which is why they're doing whatever the political masters telling them to do. And the very few, honest policemen, and there are very honest policemen, are just being pushed to the side and, made to sit without, the postings. They're being punished. They're being sent off to the bulldongs to punish them for, being honest. All of this can be solved by attention from citizens, but we're not paying attention. We're actually right now mice that are following the Pied Piper and listening to the Pied Piper play songs about 56 grams of ganja.
So well put, so very well put here. Really, Faye, it was very nice speaking to you. As of now, I'm now going to ask we have a lot of them asking you questions, okay? And
Yeah.
all of them are very important and interesting people. So you're going to have a good time now.
And
And Neha is moderating this entire, she's now become an expert at handling this webinars, you know. So Neha is coordinating this. Neha, could you please put on
Yeah, next
all
is
those
Ani.
guys with questions? Neha, it's on to you now.
Yeah,
And
Ani,
I will come in, I will come
you
in
can
if and
ask your
when
next
required.
question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Let's
Hi,
have,
hi, Faye. Yeah, Deepak. If it's okay, I'll go ahead. Hi,
please.
Faye. This is Ani here. Lot
good
of
evening.
journalistic. Good evening. Lot of journalistic blood in my family. Maybe a couple of them you know, Saira, Menezes, and Shishir. Uh,
Yes.
my daughter is also a budding journalist. She's done a master's from Columbia. So the question is, investigative journalism, which you are pioneering on the internet platform. What is the career for young journalists? Is it the internet or is it cable television? Because opinions are being formed on the cable television, and more often than not, they're not right and they're biased. So, what's the career prospect for a young journalist to come in and work in India?
Well, I believe that good journalists are platform agnostic. So it's not really about the platform that you're working for. Right now, we're all multitasking on the internet. But I honestly believe that the internet is the future and television is the past. And I'll tell you why, if I have a couple of moments to answer this question. Uh, Television, at least when I joined CNBC TV 18, I was put on a investigation team. It was a special team. We did stories on white collar crime, and we tracked economic offenses. There were at that point 12 reporters on that team, and we put out one half-an-hour show a week. And I remember we would be given a story, and we would not be heard from for 2 weeks. Because we would take that story and then we would go, and I've traveled to Chennai looking down that that rabbit hole of where the story leads, and you would come back and your editor would say, okay, I want 3-4 more pieces of information, so you'd go back again, you'd come back again. This would take a while, so we would put out, each journalist would have a story ready once every 4 or 5 weeks. Now the reason why I'm telling you this is, over the last 3 or 4 years, the budgets of television have come down a great deal. The reason why you see so much pointing and shooting on television, which is that I'm standing here behind me, so-and-so is standing behind me, is because there are no budgets, because a 24/7 monster has to be fed constantly. So instead of allowing journalists time to dig into a story and do research and read documents and really understand, meet people, they are constantly made to stand live in front of the camera and point at something. Which is why there's very little investigative journalism that happens on television anymore. There are very thinning teams. Nobody's taking time to train those journalists. They're just being thrown into the deep end. And you'll also, I'm sure, as someone with the family background in journalism, you've noticed it dropping quality in the kind of reporting, the kind of reporters, the quality of work that's going up, because there's just no in-depth research. There's no time. There's no effort that's going in. And I believe that there is a lot of room on the internet right now, because the internet doesn't put you on a 24/7 hamster wheel. You don't have to constantly feed it. You can take time and put out something of really good quality. My team and I did a profile on the Mumbai police and what happened to them during COVID. It took us about 4.5 weeks to turn that story around. But we waited until we had all the voices that we needed, and then we put it out. Because on the internet, there isn't that pressure of constantly, throwing information into that black hole. It allows for quality, it allows for time. And it is also room for short format, long format, all kinds of work. And a lot of the best journalists I know have become independent or have left television in the last 2 years. So my advice to a young person would be, pick your first job based on the editor you're going to work with. Because editors teach you ethics and they set the tone for the kind of journalist you'll be in your whole career. So first job should always be with a good editor. Don't be so preoccupied with the brand name that you're working for. The brands will come. If you're good, you will get offers from the best guys. But pick the best editor and learn from the best in your first job. That will make you a stellar journalist. So I don't believe that the industry is all bad. I believe that the good people are on the internet, and the internet is taking its, it's going to build influence over a period of time. The internet will be what television is today in terms of, in terms of influence in about a year or two, maybe faster because of the work from home culture that has been built in because of COVID. But I would recommend young people consider working for digital platforms rather than for television.
Thank you so much, Faye.
So, Faye, that was Anirudh Joshi. He's one of my dearest friends, and he's in Atlanta right now. He's staying there since almost 20 years now. And that is an Atlanta home in the background, you can see.
Yes.
And he heads HCL in Atlanta.
I work for HCL.
Yeah, he works for HCL. Okay, whom do we have next, Neha?
Mr. Sunil Dutt.
Sunil Dutt, you're on.
Yeah, hi.
Sunil is the president of Geo. So we had him last week, and he was a sensation last week. So you're on now, Sunil, please.
Yeah, hi, Faye. Good evening to you, and really fantastic hearing you. I have quick, short 3 questions because I know I would get only one chance to ask these questions, so I'll ask 3 of them. One would be, great to hear first of all, great to hear about your trust in the young youth. And the only place where I differ from you is that you say you're one of those younger people, and that's why you can relate with them. And well, I never grew up after 28, I admit, but still, I relate to young people even after 36 years of working. So I think we're in the same boat over there. My questions there now. One is, about distraction on this whole media that you spoke about. So what I want to understand is, one, why would anyone want to distract from a COVID situation, which actually, if you were to, if you were to present it in the right manner, would actually enable people to look at what was seriously going on around and become more cautious about their surroundings. So why would that happen? One, who do you think would be behind it? Would it be a state which is most impacted, or is it something else? So that's question one. My question two is, normally I find, whether it's amongst our own group or whether it's an extended number of people that I come across or I hear it in the media, we're all bashing up the governments across the world with respect to economy. And we all know that the whole situation has happened because of an extraordinary situation which has happened with respect to COVID. Now, we keep bashing up the governments. However, we don't come together and start giving any kind of solutions for it. So do you think we should be focusing on solutions, or should we be focusing on these statements only? Because what we hear is only statements and not really solutions coming together. And I refuse to believe that across the world, there are not economists or there are not governments who are willing to listen to good economists. So why is that happening? And on my last question is, on the China eyeballs, what do you think we should be doing? Should we climb down? Should we negotiate? Or should we be giving an eyeball for an eyeball? What is your thought on that? So these 3 questions.
Right. So your first question of why possibly anyone would want to distract, obviously because given the performance of states and central governments and the handling in the healthcare sector and the gloom and doom that comes with understanding that 1,200 people are dying every day, it doesn't bode very well for elections. It doesn't bode very well for governments who want to be made, who want people to believe that they've done a stellar job. And I'm not saying that it's any one particular government, but it's happening across the board because people, there is a sort of sense that we've been abandoned on this COVID matter. That it's now Bhagwan Bharosi sabko hone wala hai, so let's just get through it. And
but isn't that across the globe? Is the same across the globe everywhere?
No,
My daughters are in France and in UK, and it's the same situation there.
No, I mean, I'm, you know, in France, in UK, for example, in France, they opened up schools. There was a clear measure of how many children got affected, what kind of an outbreak there was. There's clear and present coverage of it on, you know, on all news. My sister lives in Paris. You know, there are conversations that take place on what is good for the kids and what is not. And so there is conversation about it. I'm saying that there isn't enough conversation happening in our country, and that's a problem. We're not talking about it enough. I mean, there are reports of reinfection coming in from about 6 different cities of our country, that people who got it once have got it again. We've not, you know, we've not had a press conference from the health ministry clearing up those doubts. There are some conversations that are emerging anecdotal about some sort of long-term damage that it's causing to the body. Again, we don't have any clear, you know, R&D on it, or clear sort of instructions from the health ministry on what that is. So my point is that there isn't enough conversation happening. And if we consider what happened in the beginning of the lockdown, where the health ministry officials were addressing press conferences on a daily basis, where state governments were addressing press conferences on a daily basis. And at that point, we were at 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 cases. We're now at 4.6 million cases on last count. And no government agency is talking to us. No government agency is giving us, you know, an update or a sense of urgency or any sort of communication. I think it stems from that. And what their motives could be, I mean, is only for us to guess. And I'm not in the, you know, profession of speculating. I can just notice the fact that there were press conferences earlier. There aren't any now. There were clear instructions on how to manage COVID earlier. There isn't any now. People on Marine Drive are walking around without masks. And, you know, there is, you know, no fining, no punishment that's happening. There's absolutely no sense of the kind of situation that we are in. And whether it's happening across the world or not, the truth is that India is number 2 in terms of numbers right now. So we need to be showing more of an urgency than, say, France, that has seen its numbers dip considerably from where it was. And when France was at the peak of its COVID outbreak, they were not allowed to walk their dogs outside their house. They were not allowed to jog because the government was worried that they would sprain an ankle and put extra pressure on the hospitals. They were very strict. They had to actually print out a form, sign it, fill it out every time they needed to leave the house for whatever reason, so that they were not, so government could keep track of how often they were leaving the house. So there was a sense of that kind of emergency when France was at its peak. We are arguably at our peak even now, because we keep adding more and more cases every day. It was 95, it became 96,000, and it could be 1 lakh tomorrow. That sense of urgency is not there. Again, the motives for that sense of urgency, or the motives for the distraction, is anybody's guess. And like I said, I don't speculate, so I'm not going to guess. As far as you said, bashing governments about the economy, again, there have been articles written and comments written and suggestions given by almost every single big Indian economist from around the world about how to manage the economy, the economic situation. They could have, we can argue that this was an act of God. COVID was an act of God. But my point is, when was the last time we had a press conference from the finance ministry?
No, sorry, I don't want to know about
No,
India. I was talking about the globe.
Right, fair enough. But let me finish. I heard you out. You know, I don't interrupt, and I don't like when other people interrupt me. My point is that we're not seeing any sort of response. The last financial package that was announced was in May. After that, we understand that there have been presentations that have been made to the finance ministry about what can be done, but we've not heard from the finance ministry, and the numbers are getting worse with every passing day. Across the globe as well, we've had, you know, some governments have done good jobs, some governments have done bad jobs. That's up to their citizens to decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But for our citizens, we've seen the GDP come in at minus 23.9%, and there's been no official communication from the finance ministry on what we need to do, or what they're going to do, or what the steps are going forward. And I'm sure they have access to the best minds in the world. I mean, India has brilliant people and who will, I'm sure, make themselves freely available to the government if the government needs them. So again, more communication, I think, is a problem here. And your last question of what needs to be done with China, Again, I believe that between the NSA and the Defense Ministry, there are enough people best placed to, to understand that and to decide that. There are measures being taken now on 4 different fronts, which is diplomatically. We saw our Ministry of External Affairs meet his Chinese counterpart, and they agreed on 5 things. There are commander-to-commander talks happening on the ground. There is eyeball-to-eyeball action, but there is also steps that are being taken economically. There are sort of veiled economic sanctions of banning of apps that is also taking place. So the government is doing what they're doing, but I believe there needs to be a larger interest in this from citizens. Because we have troops on the border, because we have a situation building, we should show a larger interest. The media should show a larger interest, was my point on that matter.
Thank you. Thank you, Faye.
Thank you so much. Who's next? Neha, who's next?
Mr. Sanjay Muttal.
Sanjay Muttal.
Hi.
Please, yeah, can we have Sanjay Muttal next, please? Faye, this is Sanjay Muttal, another very dear friend of ours and an important man in the CEO forum.
His
is
camera
the face
is
of HR.
not showing for some reason.
Can we have your camera, please?
It's
Please
on.
put your camera.
Mine is on.
No, we can't see you. There's a
But my
blackout
camera
in
is
your
on.
room.
Camera is on.
But we have no picture out here. It's all, you're blanked out.
Oh, no wonder. I don't know how.
Okay, then we'll, you just want
So
to ask a question?
Yeah. Wait,
I was about to say, Sanjay, hold on.
Yeah.
I was about to say that you are the face of HR. Right now, your face can't be seen at all. Okay, anyway, please ask the question.
Thank you. Faye,
Yes.
so glad, first of all, that you joined CEO Forum. Welcome to CEO Forum. This is the first opportunity to see you face to face. Extremely delighted on the ethics of journalism that you touched during the opening remarks of yours. My question to you is, lots of TV shows and news hours and whatever they're called as have become soap operas. And somehow they seem to influence people at large in either way. A particular channel has a position towards a particular ideology, another one has towards another ideology. I am seeing instances of, therefore, people becoming intolerant, as it were, in reacting to certain situations. And there are enough and more examples. Now, how do you think we, and I can't expect the business houses who control these people to come bring them back on the track, because somewhere that's they're probably giving them TRPs. Unfortunately, TRP is judging news. TRP should be judging the Saas Bahu serials, but now TRP is judging the news. Now, is there something which public at large should do? I'm talking about reverse mentoring.
Yes.
Your view on that?
So actually, here I'd like to, draw from what Mr. Sunil Dutt said in the previous question about the fact that there are global trends happening that might not specifically be Indian. I think that from the advent of social media, that has a great influence in opinions and, dividing of society into this versus that, them and us. We've seen it happen in the US with the elections where Donald Trump won. We saw it happen in the UK with Brexit. We've seen it happen in Brazil. We've seen it happen in Australia, where people are being divided down the middle and you're either on this side or on that side. There's no nuance in that opinion. So for example, in India today, if I believe that the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and the Ujjwala Yojana were brilliant ideas by this government, but the handling of the economy has not been great, there's no room for nuance. You're either this or that. You can't have a nuanced argument. So that, I think, comes from 2 things. One, that social media tends to label people. There are names that come up that you're either, Sangi or you're libtard or this or that, which is really ungraceful. But this is the kind of, this has happened across the world. And media is picking up its cues from social media. And that's why we're seeing a problem. I'd like to, if I have the time, explain 2 things to you. I have sat in boardrooms where there has been research conducted to see, largely what do people feel about certain issues, and then mandated that channels sort of go out and talk about those things because people will watch. So actually it's working in reverse. Instead of telling people what they need to know, which is what news should be, you're just reinforcing what they believe. And then that's a slippery slope, because then you're just making stuff up. And we've had instances over the last 2 weeks where channels have put out completely false information. I mean, just yesterday, there were stories running on channels that Sarah Ali Khan has been named by the NCB. Today, the NCB has said we've made no such list. No such naming has happened. So there's almost a need to just put out fiction. And the reason why this is happening, and you brought up TRPs, is because also as CEOs of organizations, you know how media buying works and how advertising works. News television is an advertising funded activity. It runs, its revenue is only ad based. So what happens is the media buyer just looks for the channel with the highest TRP. Number one and number two get the lion's share of the allocation. The rest don't. They don't even check to see what is the ethical quality or what is the quality of the content that's being put out. Whether it is communal, whether it is anti-women, whether it is they're just putting out false information. It doesn't matter. The media buyer just picks the guys with the highest TRPs. They get the money. So the motive then is to just serve TRPs. And I want to give you an example of why I believe this is very dangerous. And this is a non-political example, so it should be, less friction to understand it.
Thank you.
I remember the day when we heard that Sridevi had passed away. And I remember which office I was in, which was, it happened at 2 in the morning. I got a call about 3:30 a.m. and we went into work, and Kamala Mill's office had burnt down, so we were in a temporary office. And everybody was running stories about how she had been murdered, and there were these bathtub visuals of, oh, she's taller than a bathtub, how she had died in it, and insinuations that there was foul play, insinuation that her husband had killed her, that she had taken drugs, that now this is sounding familiar, right? That she had probably, consumed alcohol, all of these things, and it was really mucky. And from Mumbai, I had called local journalists in Dubai. I had asked somebody to go to the High Commission, to the hospital where the postmortem was done, to find out if there is any evidence. And we tried all day. Closing in on our 8 p.m. show, there was no evidence. There was nothing. All it said was death by drowning. That's it. There was nothing. And so I took a call that day that we are not going to do this story. We're going to do some other story. Of course, nobody watched my channel that day because everybody was watching the exciting story. And we had 0 TRPs that night. But this was done, and now it has been 2.5 years later. No evidence has emerged that she was murdered. Nobody apologized. I mean, look at the damage that was done to the family that was grieving. Look at the damage that was done to the legacy of someone who worked from the time she was a child. I mean, when I say Sridevi, you should be thinking chalbaz, you should be thinking Hawa Hawaii, but instead we're thinking bathtub. Right? That's damage to her legacy. That's damage to her family. That's defamation of her husband that nobody apologized for. I mean, fundamentally, human beings will make mistakes. Newsrooms are run by human beings who make mistakes once in a while. But you have to apologize for it the next day and say, hey, you know what? We got this wrong. Don't believe it because it was an error. That's how journalism is supposed to function. It has to be self-regulated. But now, it's only happening for the TRPs because the advertiser only cares about the TRPs. So think about the fact that that much damage was done to Sridevi's family and to her legacy for one night's TRP. Nothing else. We can't argue that there was a political motivation because there was none. It was not a political story. We can't argue that someone was trying to do something devious. Just for one night's TRP. They went to that extent. It just goes to show how desperate the times are. Television is an expensive business. Satellite space, distribution, hundreds of team members, studios, this costs money. And in a bad economy, again, the CEO forum knows better than anybody else. In a bad economy, what's the first thing you cut? You cut your marketing spends. And so you cut the spending that goes into advertising. So then it becomes more desperate because the pie has gotten smaller and we have to struggle more for it. So then that rat race of TRP is now hitting a fever pitch because nobody cares what they're putting out on air. There's no accountability. They're putting out whatever they want just to make that night's TRPs. And so it's very important to understand as viewers of these television channels that you are not the customer. You are the commodity. Your attention span is being packaged and sold to the real customer who is the advertiser. So I only care what's good for the advertiser. I don't care what is good for you. Which is why television channels are putting out information that's not good for society. It's not responsible. It's not fact-checked. And they're not sorry. It's a really important thing to understand is that they're not sorry.
It's a really sad state of affairs.
Thank you so much. Thanks for clarifying this.
No, Faye, I have been observing Arnab, whom I used to appreciate hell of a lot till a few months back. And since the past few months, 2 months rather, I'm having second thoughts about him. The fact that he can downsize and bring about and try to open up Sunanda Pushkar case, or even try to insinuate that Sridevi was killed, and try to reopen the case, especially when it happened in Dubai, where the police would instantly, try to make a proper case out of it if they could get their hands on. This all goes to prove that what you said is absolutely correct, absolutely correct. He's just trying to get eyeballs, just trying to get TRP.
So sir, if I may just, add one thing. On the day of Sridevi's death and then proceeding to her funeral, when I took a call to decide that we are not going to do that particular story about how she died, we instead ran a program about appreciating and remembering her life. I had a young person who walked up to me saying, but what if it turns out tomorrow that she was murdered? Won't you be embarrassed? And it was a very good question because I thought about it and I realized, I told her, if it turns out tomorrow that she was murdered, we will cover it then. Because that is the job of the journalist, to cover the facts of what has happened, not to sit and speculate on what we think could have happened. I mean, that's okay to do, at your dinner table. It's okay to do in the canteen of the office. It's okay to do over a smoke break saying, I think this might have happened. That's all right. As citizens, it's okay to do that. But as journalists, it's not okay to do that. Journalists must only and only report the facts. And that's the problem. That's where the missing link is. We've forgotten that it has to only do with the facts. We shouldn't be demanding, we shouldn't be pushing for, CBI aani chahiye, ye karni chahiye, wo karni chahiye. We should be reporting ki CBI aa gayi. We should be, just saying what has happened. And through this TRP mess, we've lost sight of what we learned on day one in journalism school, which is that journalism is necessarily and compulsorily in the non-fiction category. It can never be fiction. And very often these days it becomes fiction.
Very well said. Very well said. Dr. Himanshu, do you have any questions? Dr. Himanshu.
Yeah, good evening. As usual, a wonderful show, dear. And Faye, as usual, fantastic. Absolutely honest answers. Wonderful.
Let me hold on. Let me just quickly introduce you, Dr. Himanshu. Dr. Himanshu is one of the leading eye surgeons in Asia, I would say. He has got a fabulous clinic, a fantastic clinic, and very, very well equipped with the latest technology for eye care. Over to you, Himanshu.
Thank you, dear, for a wonderful evening for me. Faye, wonderful to see you talking your heart out and absolutely to the point how we are sold as commodities. Let me know, I just wanted to ask you, in the morning when I wake up, I was trying to read, whom should I follow? See, the narrative given in the world by CNN, Fox News, always bothers me because I can see a narrative being given to me. Who do you follow? Who are the people that we should be listening to the tweets of? Would you have some suggestions for me?
So I'm still a believer, sir, in newspapers. I read 5 newspapers in the morning, and I read the Indian Express, the Times of India, the Hindustan Times, at least one business paper which I read online, and one paper from the South. I'm a little, again, emotionally attached to the Deccan Herald because that's a habit. And I feel that if you read different, points of view, you get a more rounded perspective of what's going on. This would be the equivalent of watching both CNN and Fox, but that might be detrimental to one's mental health. On Twitter, I track all the ministries because all ministries in government now use Twitter to communicate. I track ANI, and I follow all the major news agencies. So everyone from NDTV to India Today to the Times of India to the various mirrors, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, and Mumbai. So I follow all of these guys, but then again, I'm a journalist, so this is what I do all day. This is my job. I don't have any other sort of day job.
No.
But but I feel that if you're asking me what the best sources are, I think there are a lot of great independent journalists. For opinion, there are great independent journalists. I'm not going to tell you who's bad and who's good, because instinctively what good journalism is. I'd say pick 2 or 3 strong voices and follow them. But if you're interested, if you're a news junkie and you're interested in breaking news, then follow at least 5 different organizations so that you get sort of a rounded point of view on everyone.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. That's what I wanted to know, whom to follow. And on the internet world, with everything opening up so well, I trust the net more now. So the tweets from some important people would, the WHO narrative, all those narratives which were given to me. So anybody in the international, Farid Zakaria, who would you trust? From which news agencies?
So I personally, again, so this is a personal preference. I track Christian Amanpour. I track Anderson Cooper. I track the BBC. So, and I track Al Jazeera, because, there's an American point of view, there's a British point of view, and there is a Middle Eastern point of view. And that, again, when you look at all of them, you tend to get a slightly more rounded point of view on what is going on. Also, there are, there's the New York Times that puts out a great sort of newsletter every morning that you can read. The Washington Post puts out a newsletter every morning. And there are some business channels that do a good job as well. So CNBC is a great source of information if you're looking at something globally.
Thanks very much for your input. Thank you very much.
Faye, it's been almost 1 hour. Are you okay for 1 or 2 more questions?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
What a sweet smile here. What a sweet smile. I'm really enamored by that smile. And Neha, do we have anybody else?
Yeah, Brahmaji wanted to ask, Mr. Brahma Rao.
Brahmaji, we have Brahma. He was very, very senior in State Bank of India. He used to report directly to Arundhati Bhattacharya. So we have Brahmaji. Brahmaji right now is in Hyderabad. Brahmaji, could you please ask a question?
Yeah. Good evening, Fayes. This is Brahma Rao, and of course Brahmaji for DR. And
Good evening, Mr. Rao.
and yeah, good evening. I am presently working as member technical in the NCLT Hyderabad after my retirement as a senior general manager from State Bank of India. I am in Hyderabad bench, and my question is, I have 2 questions to ask. One is, what is happening to the institutions in this country? One. The second, for you journalists, mostly, I'm not generalizing this, but mostly, particularly the southern part of India doesn't exist for you. My observation, is it correct or wrong? Because I am in actually Hyderabad. I belong to Andhra Pradesh. A lot of destruction is happening, in both the states, particularly in Andhra Pradesh, in the name of, change of governments and other things. And nothing is being reported in the national channels. Nothing is being, heard anything about what is happening down south, particularly. Maybe in Madras, Chennai, something is being covered, but other than that, we generally don't. For you journalists, maybe I'm strong. It doesn't exist. Am I correct in my perception?
You are to some extent, you are correct, sir. To take your second question first about South India, there has been an extended complaint to this effect, not just from the southern states, and I'm from a southern state myself, but also from the northeast. Also from states like Odisha that feel completely ignored. there was a term that was invented in newsrooms called the hegemony of distance, where basically, because a lot of these news channels and national newspapers are seated out of Delhi and partially out of Mumbai, it's the things that happen in Delhi and Mumbai that take precedence and say, oh, this is really important, we must write about it. But you're right, there has to be a larger representation of issues from the South. For example, when I was at Mirror Now, we pulled up issues from the South on a regular basis. In fact, we've had shows in Kannada, in Tamil, in Telugu, and we've talked a lot more about citizen issues in the South because there is a lot more movement in the South about things that are going on. But I agree with you that there has to be greater representation of journalists from different states in newsrooms, and through that, a greater representation in what is being covered. But to do with, what's happening on television right now, I think one of the other issues that takes place is the fact that instead of covering multiple stories during the day and telling you like they used to back in the day, in a half-an-hour bulletin, at least 15 things that took place from across the country, there is now a big story. So television channels decide in the morning what their big story is, and they will just continue on that story all day until prime time. And they'll keep breaking the same thing over and over again. And this is actually a tactic where if nothing new has happened, you just take what is breaking news from 2 hours ago, and you break it again as if it's brand new information.
Yeah.
Because apparently research has shown that if the screen shows that this is breaking first, exclusive, something, the audience watches. Brings us back to our point about TRP, but that's how to get it's called sticky content. It's how to get the audience to stay. Because if you come to a channel, you don't get counted as a viewer. If you stay for 1 minute and then for longer, you impact the TRPs. So the idea is to get you to stay. So I will tell you that whatever I'm telling you right now is mind-blowingly important. It's the most important thing, even if the information is 2 days old. And they all stay on one story. So earlier, again, there was a format where different journalists were commissioned different stories. So somebody in Kashmir was working on one story. Somebody in Bangalore was working on their story. Somebody in Hyderabad was working on their story. And all of these journalists would file their stories by the end of the day, and you would get a news bulletin. Now what has happened is, because the format has changed and because they stay on the same story, one story all day, the entire force of journalists are sent for this one story. So for example, for want of better examples, because this is the most immediate one, on the Kangana story, one will be standing at Mohali Airport, one will be standing at Mumbai Airport, one will be standing at Shiv Sena Bhavan, somebody will be standing outside her office, somebody is standing on Marine Drive, stopping random people and saying, how do you feel about this? So the whole force is then working on one story, instead of them each working on different stories, which is why there is a lack of, there's a lack of depth and quality. Because everybody is then just assigned to that one story. Because again, TRP research shows that, like social media, whatever is trending is the thing that audience wants to watch. So people will come to watch Kangana ke saath kya ho raha hai. Or agar aap abhi at that point you're showing something about another city, you will change the channel and go to whichever channel is showing what they want to see. So in order to not lose out, everybody just stays on the same story all day. And that's the unfortunate reality of, like I keep saying, why the system is broken. Because they do it for TRPs, and they're doing the TRPs for the money. And so there's now, it's a hamster wheel. There's no way to get off this wheel. And that's why people from Assam during the floods felt that the floods were not being covered. The cyclone hit Calcutta, and people in Calcutta felt that it was not being covered correctly. There is a problem again with NEET in Tamil Nadu. At least 3 children have committed suicide because of NEET not being covered in national media. Like you said, there are up to a number of problems between Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, not the least of which is the corruption, but again, not being covered. So you're right about the fact that the system is bad right now, and we need to find solutions to fix it.
Thank you, Faye.
Let us
Thank you
hope
so
something
much.
will come out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Faye, can we take a few minutes more of your time? Are you okay?
Yes, I'm fine. I'm
no,
fine.
one more question I asked, Faye.
Oh, yes, about institutions.
Yeah.
So, which, if I may ask for clarification on the question, which institutions are you referring to?
Particularly what happened to CBI,
Mm.
the entire episode, what happened in the CBI, and what happened in Supreme Court. Judges holding press conference. Of course, I am also in the judiciary, quasi-judicial system now. I am a member in the NCLT in Hyderabad bench.
Yes.
But still, it bothers me what is happening, in the institutions, to the institutions. And it is the greed of my perception, of course, greed of the people who are retiring. They don't have anything except their post-retirement, benefits.
Yes.
What is happening in the country? What is going to happen to the country and to the people? Nobody bothers. My post-retirement benefit. That is how the mindset in the thinking is going on. That's my perception. Of course, I may be wrong. What is your view on that?
So you're absolutely right. We have a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who's now a member of Rajya Sabha almost immediately after
exactly.
the Supreme Court. It's a deeply worrying thing. And there is no clarity, even though we've had various instances where Mr. Arun Jaitley himself said retired Supreme Court judges should not be given any position at all, but at least there should be a cooling off period, which is not being active right now. With the CBI, the matter in the CBI, at that point, I had conversations with several very senior retired IPS officers, including former heads of the CBI, who believed that at that point, there could have been nothing worse than what was happening in the CBI, because as soon as the citizens begin to believe that the CBI can be politically motivated, then we're done. Because where do you go if you feel that your state police is not doing a good job, if you don't believe in the CBI? One piece of information, and this is just information, I'm not going to tell you whether it's good or bad, that I don't know, a lot of people might not have realized, that when Rakesh Asthana and Alok Verma were battling at each other, they were both moved out. Rakesh Asthana was put in charge of the Border Security Force, and he is the DG of the Narcotics Control Bureau right now, which is the bureau that is currently investigating Rhea Chakravarti. I'm just going to leave that information with you. Also, we had the man who took over from him, Mr. Nageshwar Rao, who is interim chief of the CBI, whose tweet had to be deleted from Twitter yesterday because he actually put out a tweet saying that he was happy that Swaminathan and I beg your pardon, Swami Agnivesh passed away, and his only grouse is that it didn't happen earlier. Swami Agnivesh, I beg your pardon.
Oh my goodness.
He said horrible things. He said he was, very unhappy that he was born as a Telugu Brahmin, and I'm very happy that he died. I mean, for someone who uses his uniform photograph in his Twitter handle to say something like that is shocking. So there are a lot of gray areas of institutions which are ethical areas that may now be being crossed, because these are not laws. These are, this is protocol, this is proprietary. And a lot of that is sort of being abandoned right now, maybe for positions after
post-retirement.
Yes.
Yeah, and they don't bother about the country. I mean, institution. They want their, position to be safeguarded.
And as a former banker, Mr. Rao, even what happened with the RBI. I mean, we changed a shocking number of RBI governors in a very short period of time. Governors who didn't finish their term, which should be worrying for us.
Yeah, when this guy was appointed, Mr. Patel, people thought that he was the henchman of the BJP. But when he took up a stand, and he was thrown out mercilessly, and that Urjit Patel, RBI governor.
We have one more person asking for some question. Brahmaji, thank you so much, Brahmaji, for your interesting questions.
Thank you.
We have Raji. Raji is the sweetheart of the forum. Raji, Tamil Theriyo? Raji?
Hi, Faye. Lovely, really hearing you speak. And I had told in the forum also that I'd stopped reading newspapers. I'd stopped listening to all news channels. I have the power of the on-off button in my hand, and I wouldn't listen to any news channels, but having heard you, I think it's wonderful. And I just started to follow you incidentally, and I noticed that my daughter is also following you. So that means you're right, absolutely right. The younger ones are following you. So just a quick question, and it might seem a very unnadi question or a very basic question. You know, in the corporate world, we say that, or for that matter anywhere, that measurement drives behavior, right? So if the measurement is TRP, and that's what is causing all this, is there any way of, I don't know if the information minister or the IND ministers can come together and just change the measurement of TV channels. I don't know who decides on these things, but instead of the TRP, if there is any other way of measuring the quality of the news that you have covered.
What a brilliant question to ask at the CEO forum, ma'am. I think that there are two things that we shouldn't wait for the IMB ministry to interfere, step in, because, and I'll tell you why. Because journalism needs to necessarily be without interference from government.
Right.
Because if the government begins to step in this fashion, tomorrow it will open the door for future governments to step in on journalism that they don't like or they find uncomfortable. And that's a situation that any democracy wants to avoid. Really, the button is in the hand of the CEOs who happen to all be in this group at this point. Do not place advertisements in channels that are putting out wrong information. Channels that actually solicit advertisements should put out also submit a report of how many errors they made in the last 3 months. A quarterly report of errors need to be released. Or maybe we should get a independent organization to just catalog the errors that they're making. I mean, yesterday you said Sarah Ali Khan, a young actress, a young woman who has her whole career ahead of her, a young woman you said has been named by the NCB for taking drugs. And the NCB today came out and said, we've not said any such thing. I mean, who's going to take responsibility for this?
Exactly.
That channel should not receive advertisements. The decision maker at the end of the day, you know, there are the commodity and the customer, right? The customer is corporate India. The customer is those who are placing the advertisements. Those advertisements should just be withdrawn. Those people who continue to place advertisements should be called out for not being more careful and for allowing this behavior to continue. And citizens and, you know, those who are watching need to change the channel. As soon as you know, and you know instinctively, like I said, you know good and bad work instinctively. Do not watch for entertainment. There is enough entertainment on Netflix and Amazon and all of these other categories. Go watch some people yelling at each other on an OTT platform. Do not watch this for entertainment. You're just encouraging them to do more.
Exactly, and very well answered. And that's exactly
keeps them this thing. And also, I mean, the model that I'm using right now on the internet, which I know that a lot of other journalists are also using, is to raise investments from those people who care about good journalism, and B, to ask the audience to pay in terms of memberships and subscriptions, because then I am then accountable to my audience. I'm not accountable to anybody else. If the audience doesn't like what I'm doing, they will stop paying me and I'll be out of business. So then the measure is just purely how much the audience cares that I continue to be able to do my job. It's as simple as that. The other innovation that we're putting in is accountability. There will be a monthly phone call, a con call that will be held with our premium subscribers, where I will be accountable to them. And they can ask me questions of why did you do this story, why did you take this stand, or whatever else. And I have to be, as the editor, fully prepared and ready to answer those questions, because there has to be accountability to my audience. We're also going to institute an editorial board along with our board of directors, to which I will have to submit a quarterly report of errors and what we have done to ensure those errors don't take place, because errors will take place. But there has to be a responsibility towards those errors. There has to be a responsibility to rectify the system if it is broken. So there'll be two levels of accountability to make sure that under no circumstance do we wind up where television is today.
Wow, that's really 3 cheers to, we really wish you the best. Yeah.
So I think now we'll take our last question. And the last question was by whom, Neha?
Dr. Falguni Shah is also on.
Falguni Shah, okay, Falguni Shah, well-known dermatologist. Falguni, please come on.
Hi, can you see me, Deepak?
No, I can't see you. Where are you? Yeah, please show Falguni.
Yeah, we can't see her when I can't see her. Ah, there you are.
Ah, there we are. I can see you now,
Okay.
Falguni.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hi, Faye, and it was a wonderful evening, and I've been following you on Instagram for the longest time now. So I wanted to begin and say a big thank you for covering doctors the way you did. I mean, I've not seen anyone go into the heart of the hospitals wearing the PPE, and I've seen you doing that. So my first thing was I wanted to thank you because you got in front the plight of the doctors, the resident doctors who are working in the government hospitals. So that is one thing. And secondly, I'm a huge sucker for newspapers. I mean, I need newspapers in the morning. But however, because of the television media, newspapers always get the news last. So, you're reading it the next day morning. So you think the era of newspapers is going to get over. And it was
So,
just like a concern.
so I believe, and I read the papers myself. I don't believe television is telling us everything. At best, you would have seen one story on the front page on TV the previous night, but there are at least 200 other stories that you can read in the paper. I believe that there might be a change in format. During the lockdown, many people did not get their newspapers for at least 3 or 4 months. That is a habit-breaking amount of time to not have access to your physical paper. I know a lot of people are still not completely happy reading it online, and you're not completely comfortable with the interface of having to read it like this. But newspapers may evolve. They might become smaller. They might become easier to carry around. They might. For example, for those who are listening from overseas, that this dropping of the newspaper to your doorstep right now only happens in India. Everywhere else in the world, people pick up their paper on their way to work, right? While they're walking to the office, they pick it up from the newsstand or they pick it up from one of those boxes, the vending boxes. That habit has stopped completely because they're accessing the news on their phones, and so they're not going to pull the paper. But in India, we're still pushing the paper to our audience. And if you've ever tried, and this is an interesting, try and convince your newspaper guy to not bring you the Times of India tomorrow. He will never take no for an answer. He will continue to bring it to you because they receive, benefits from pushing the paper. So pushing paper is being pushed in your direction. Whereas overseas, you have to pull the paper. And it's easier to break that habit. It's more difficult to break this habit. But what's happening in a lot of homes is that paper is not being opened at all. It goes exactly like that to the Radhi pile because nobody is opening that paper. Fewer and fewer people are opening the paper. And young people are I met someone, and this was a bit of a shock for me because I've worked with young people my whole career. But I met a 20-year-old who did not know what paper was coming to her house. Whether it was the Times of India or the Hindustan Times or the Indian Express, she didn't know what it was. And that was a first for me because normally they at least know what paper is coming. They don't know what's on the headline, but at least they know what paper is coming. So it's reached that point where they don't even know what paper is coming to the house anymore. So our generation might continue to read, but as the current 18, 19, 20-year-olds become operative in the sense that they become the customers, at that point newspapers will have to evolve. Again, the lockdown has been detrimental and very painful for newspapers around the world. Most of them are figuring out how to become digital, how to become membership-driven digital. New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic Times, all of them are asking you to pay online instead of taking the physical paper. So this is now, again, I think an evolution that will come. As soon as we come out of COVID, you'll see newspapers change what they do to change with the world. I
Thank you
also
so
must
much.
say it's very lovely to it's very lovely to see women on the CEO's forum.
Thank
Oh, we have plenty of women, and Faye, this will go on and on. So I don't want to take more of your time, but I must keep one thing on record. A, you are fabulous, and Faye, today's been my lucky day because whenever I used to watch you on television, I used to always wish, maybe one day Faye should interview me.
It would be my pleasure to interview you at some point, sir.
Or dekho kya ho gaya? I'm interviewing you. Thank you so much, Faye. With
Thank
that, Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys, from the CEO Forum. There are many of you from the Rotary Club who have also surfaced out here. Thank you, guys. This was to be technically a 20-minute session only, and it's gone to 1 hour, 25 minutes. Good night. Good luck. Faye, look forward to having you more active on the forum.
Yes.
Okay. And you will get a lot of comments on the forum right now.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye,
Mr.
Faye. Bye.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you for being there.
Faye, call me Deepak. Call me Deepak. Everyone calls me Deepak or they call me D. Mr. Rao, only my wife calls me.
Thank you.
Okay. So call me D.
For me, DR.
Or
Actually.
DR, yeah. Bye. Good night, guys.
Yeah,
And
good night.
cheers. And cheers.
Thank you.
One more
Okay,
for Talks
good
on the
night.
Road.
Thank you, Faye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.